Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we'll get started. So we'll get started in a couple minutes. Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie. I'm the History Specialist at Explorica. I just wanted to welcome you to our very first history webinar, Remembering Vimy 105 Years Later. We're really excited you could all join us. Normally this time of year in the fall, we're getting to meet with teachers at conferences and talk to you all about history. And since this year is a little bit different, we didn't get to see you all across the country this year. We wanted to bring a little bit of Canadian history to you. So tonight we'll be having a 1-hour chat about Vimy Ridge with Dave Robinson, who's an award-winning retired teacher and also helps us out here at Explorica with our history program. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dave.
Thank you for attending tonight. And Steph, if you could switch to the next slide, that would be great. This famous picture is a ghost of Vimy. And I think for those who have been there or wish to go there, I think it expresses the sentiment very accurately on how it is. What you're looking at is where the Vimy Memorial is on the highest point, Hill 145, also known as the Pimple. Steph, if you could go to the next slide, please. Here's what is on our agenda to cover tonight about Vimy. And now that being said, some of the things I'll be talking about, we'll jump back and forth on different points. But the myth and legend, the men and women, heroes and leaders of Vimy, the plan of attack, the Vimy Memorial, and Walter Allward, pilgrimages past and present, so that everybody understands about how the whole Vimy thing begins and how it ends. And then the last slide you'll see will be the next webinar slide topic that we're thinking of talking about. And throughout it, if you have some questions to send along the way, please type them in. It's automatically muting everybody except Stephanie and myself. And so sadly, you'll have to listen to us. Next slide, please, Steph. The myth and the legend. The difficulty with Vimy is every 5 years for the past probably 35 years, every 5 years as they celebrate a new milestone in the history of World War I, somebody writes a new book. And as it's gotten closer to the 100th anniversary, which is now past, more and more books are written. And everybody has a different viewpoint or covers a different story. But to go back, just understand how what's happened. It's a remarkable journey. For those of my generation, you probably remember that when we were growing up, not too much was taught about Canadian history after the Plains of Abraham. There were very few history books at the time because the size of Canada's population, the Canadian men and women didn't talk much about the war, either war, World War I and World War II. I know I played minor ball and was sponsored by the local legion, and we didn't know what the local legion was really. We just knew they were men who fought in our war. And we didn't know the history. Nobody really talked about it. And then it wasn't until 2 years later when things start to take off. If you have money available, I'd like you to take out a $20 bill just for a moment and take a look at it. On the new $20 bill, you notice that on the front it was the $20 bill was one of the first new ones with the holograms on it. Of course, we have the symbols of Canada. Queen Elizabeth, the Peace Tower. The Peace Tower, of course, being built to commemorate World War One. And on this particular bill, you notice there's a Canadian flag on top of the Peace Tower. If you look at older Canadian bills, when it shows the Peace Tower, you notice there's no flag. We didn't start showing a flag on it until we actually had our own flag. Now, if you turn over the bill, you will see the Vimy Memorial. Of all the great symbols of Canada, why did they pick the Vimy Memorial? I remember when we proposed, as part of the Vimy Ridge, we proposed the Vimy Memorial. We were actually hoping for a $2 coin, and to be on the loony for maybe the year of the 100th anniversary. But after our meetings, Jim Flaherty was very much part of. They decided on the Vimy Memorial. I would have picked a different design. I would have shown the base too, but they picked on it. There were some of the comments, the initial comments when we traveled across Canada presenting the bill to schools, etc. People were saying, why the Twin Towers on the $20 bill? But they picked the Twin Towers because they thought it spoke about the Canadian image, the Canadian message of what Canada stands for. And I think to truly understand how far we've come in 100 years, over 100 years now, is we have to go way back. When Britain declared war, Canada, as you know, was automatically at war. We had no choice in it. And so the call went out. At that time in Canada's history, our men volunteered, probably for 4 different reasons they joined up. One was for king and country. And remember, at this time, almost all Canadians who were enlisting were born in England. And so they felt that loyalty to their mother country. The other reasons they joined were money. They wanted the $1.10 a day that the government was paying, $1 in salary, 10 cents for living expenses in Europe. And those who had a family to support and they were to show that they were the loan provider, they would get an additional $20 a month. They also had they would join because they wanted a trip to Europe. They actually did think back then. They were told that they'd be home by Christmas. And then some of them wanted a chance. They believed in the whole theory about that women love men in a uniform, so a chance to meet females, either in Europe or here at home before they left. So call went out, and men went out to different communities to help round out volunteers. In some communities, the volunteer rate was so high that they actually had to have raffles. They get a big pickle jar and put, if they could only take 20 men to join the local regiment from that community, they would put as many blank pieces of paper in the pickle jar and put an X on it. If you drew an X, you got to enroll. So that was one of the things that in early. The other thing is when our Canadian men got there, they were looked down by the British. I can say this because Vanessa is British, and so I can have that sort of honesty. And our men who were promoted were unlike the British in large, where our Canadians were promoted on their ability and their leadership ability. While the British were often promoted because of their standing in British society. Now let's flip forward. So the training went forward. Our men went, and off they went to England, and they trained in England before they went over to France. And when they arrived in France to fight, they were largely in a backup role. And which so prior to, as we're getting in early into 1917, we have to understand that a lot of different factors are at play at this point. The Russian Revolution was about to happen, and so that meant that the Russian soldiers were soon be withdrawing from the war, and so the German soldiers were removed from the Russian front. Will be coming back to France because the loss already happened. Germany they shrunk the size of the France line. They went from now basically from Arras down to St. Quentin. It was about 100 miles, and so they fortified their positions. And meantime, the French army, which had fought in this area of Arras. They'd fought there for 2 years and lost 200,000 men. The British had lost 100,000 men. And the French armies were very discouraged. In fact, they were revolting. They wanted the war to end. And the English and Britain and their allies, Britain and its colonies, were still pretty resolute, but we were losing men at a rate faster than we had new volunteers trained and over there. So that's basically the setup. The Canadian Corps, which are there, were 4 platoons, each with 4 sections. USA is about to enter the war on April 6th, but it's going to take a year for them to get there. So they decide that to keep things going, to keep things safe, our side decides, our allies decide that we need to do a spring action, have something that we have to do an attack to stop the Germans. And so they decide on the Third Battle of Arras, and so it begins. So we start training and meeting, and our side meets, and the Canadian Corps as assigned the Vimy Ridge. We basically said, no, thank you. You know, we're a colony, and you think you're stupid. You know, you think we are stupid, but you lost 200,000 men, you lost 100,000 men. Why would we want to do that? And they said, because you really haven't led any part of the war. At this point, we want you to do this initiative. We basically said, okay, but we want to do it our way. And so things began. And I'll get into more of the planning in a few moments. But in the growth of what happened in Vimy, which we know was a victory, it's been said that the Battle of Vimy Ridge marks the birth of the nation. It's probably a bit strong, but in a way it's right, but in a different way than I think a lot of people see it. It's in my opinion that Vimy Ridge was solely a Canadian victory, and that the things that we did were unique to Vimy, that we started it. And Steph, if you could turn the page, please. To the next slide. The first fact is, in essence, it was the first time that all Canadian divisions fought together. I think what's important to remember is one of the first things I said when I started talking was that when our soldiers went there, we were part of the British Empire. And this is the first time that we were all brought together. And something remarkable happened while we were prepping. And it started back in our training, but it was truly together when we were all together at Vimy, and we started our training and our planning. That is, the men from Alberta, the men from BC, got to meet the men from Nova Scotia, from Quebec, from Ontario. And we didn't have the newspapers, we didn't have the internet. There was no way, I mean, the fishermen didn't know what the loggers or the farmers out west were doing. They didn't know what life was like. So it was when they were having the meals, while they were digging the mines, while they were laying the railways, they fought. They sometimes fought each other in fights and arguments break up, but they talked and they shared things together. They slept on the ground together at night. So they got a sense of what it was like to be Canadian. It's remarkable things happened. If you ever had the opportunity to visit a place called Maison Blanche. Maison Blanche is across from the Nouvelle Saint Vaast German cemetery, which is just a couple miles down from the Vimy Memorial. This was an underground chalk mine that some British miners found around the 95th anniversary. And if you have a chance to go down, when you go underneath the mines, I'm sure you've seen this on some TV programs. The men, while they're waiting and prepping and sleeping and getting ready, they carved into the walls or just used a pencil, and they put things on the walls because they knew what might happen and they might not come back. So they started putting things on the walls. They put their names. They would write or carve. They would somehow take their mess utensils, their knives, their spoons, their forks, and carve into the chalk walls symbols of Canada. And the symbols that are most often there, you'll see some of these in the Vimy tunnels too, but not as much as in Maison Blanche or some other areas. The symbols they did were the maple leaf, some farm animals, a couple girlfriends, despite what you may read somewhere else. There were the odd risque somewhat pornographic carving that some of the men might have drawn. But you can see how these men thought themselves now as Canadians. In fact, in the Maison Blanche tunnel, one of the men carved out of a solid block of chalk away from the wall. He carved a mailbox to represent a Toronto mailbox so that men could write the letters to home and put them on top of this mailbox so it'd be collected by some of the army staff and sent home either just before the battle or after they left for the battle. So I would argue that there's some truth to the statement that it was the birth of a nation, but not because of what we accomplished necessarily in lineage. I think it's more of how it brought the men there and gave them a sense of their own Canadian identity that brought them all together. The third fact is were some major innovations, but we also took some innovations that had been started and not maybe used to their full potential, and we improved them, and I'll talk about them as we go on. But the myth and the legend of Vimy has continued to grow over the ages, and my fear right now is that because of the current conditions in the world, that we might lose, because it's gotten more every year. When I led a group at my school and some other schools, we went to the 65th anniversary of D-Day, we stopped in Vimy, and we met, as I always go there, whenever I took any type of group to France, our school did to the French Caribbean, we always stopped at Vimy Ridge. And we stopped at Vimy on the way to D-Day, and they mentioned to us that the 90th anniversary refit of the Vimy was about to take place, and they wanted to warn us that in the future be there, and it was all ready for the 90th anniversary. But at that time, in talking to them, attendance annually at that time was just over 200,000 people a year. It shrunk to 200,000 people. And the Canadian government, Veterans Affairs, is actually international. In the Parks Canada, we're looking at restricting and maybe closing down Vimy Ridge as a national, the youth program, the guide program, maybe stopping that because they're worth an awful lot of money. It's a lot of expenses that to pay for just such a few people attending the park. And most of the people attending the park were just the locals who would go jogging or riding their bikes every day. But they wanted to make, Veterans Affairs wanted to make sure that they remained open. So when I was talking, and our group was talking to Veterans Affairs, and we were talking about 90th, I said we would come back for the 90th anniversary. And I said, I would try to bring back enough Canadian students that we could have one student there for every Canadian that died. And it was just mentioned as a comment. But the next week we got back, Veterans Affairs Canada, which is based in PEI, phoned my school and asked to speak to me. So our head secretary, Trey Muir, came up and phoned me up in my room and said, Veterans Affairs wants to talk to you. And they said, were you serious? And I said, yes. And they said, what are you doing Wednesday? So they flew into Port Perry to talk about planning on this. And what happened is we came up with an agreement that I would be seconded for 5 years, the next 5 years, for history trips to battlefields to help promote it, to show you the state of affairs at that time. Veterans Affairs could not afford to second me. What they had to do was to approach other departments in the government, like Parks Canada, Heritage Canada, and each asked them to contribute towards to cover a salary of one teacher. And that's how it all sort of began, and things started ticking off from there. But we'll talk a bit more about things that happened in 5 years and 5 years after that in a few minutes. Steph, if you go on to the next slide, please. I want to talk a bit about some of the men of Vimy. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned prior, a lot of our leaders were the Canadian leaders were chosen on their merits. British men were largely chosen, some on merit, but a lot of times it was where they went to school and everything. And the leader of the whole expeditionary forces point in charge of the Canadians was Sir Julian Byng, either famous as the commander of our forces, or then becoming our governor general, or then his wife being using her name for the Lady Byng Trophy in AHL. All those things. Our soldiers loved him. He was a bit strong-headed. He was, but they loved him. They referred to themselves as the big boys. If you go on Amazon or one of the other online programs, you can get yourself a Bing Boy pin. They all, when they came back from the war, it was fun. They wore these pins that called themselves. What he was probably best for was that he knew there had to be a bunch of reforms. And he also believed that he needed intensive, you're going to capture Vimy Ridge, you had to prepare. And so in doing that, he reached out and he picked a leader. He wanted a Canadian to lead the Canadian Corps, and who he thought would do it best. And he actually sent him away to study with some of the other, with the French troops to see what they did. Steph, you can do the next slide. And that's General Arthur Currie. Arthur Currie was from BC. He was a teacher. He also sold real estate. If you study his whole history, it's a bit of a mixed history. He had some problems with money and borrowed some money that he shouldn't have, which he had to repay back to get his command. But he was also talking. You can't tell by his picture here, but he was sort of a pear shape, and he wasn't the charismatic leader that Bing was, and but he knew from his study of what went on elsewhere that what was important for Canadian troop was they had to be ultra prepared, and he followed this and improved on all his major battles from Vimy Ridge on the Hill 70 to Passchendaele and to Arras and the Canal du Nord. Right across the entire Allied system, he's widely considered as one of the finest generals of the war, and he's absolutely instrumental in all our successes moving forward, especially in the last 100 days. Next slide, Steph. Here we're going to have another British leader who was involved. Nobody talks about him very much. That is Major Brooke. Long history in the British Army. Prior to that, he was also in the Boer War, etc. He saw what the French attempted to do with the creeping barrage, and he knew that he thought that was a key, but he thought that it had to be better and better planned. And he also set up a whole barrage of the Canadian Corps, but he doesn't get enough credit. It's somebody that is worth studying if you want to delve into it further. Next one, please. Andrew McNaughton. Now, Andrew would be Kerry's right-hand man, brilliant tactician, and also an engineer. Did some teaching as well. Taught some science, and he did a number of things which were absolutely pivotal in their importance. One of the problems with the previous attacks at Vimy is that French and the British would bomb the heck out of the ridge. And it got to the point when the Canadians got there, they said, what is this? This was just a giant graveyard with bodies. There were no trees at this point. They'd all been destroyed. But attack after attack, artillery bombing after artillery bombing, the barbed wire was still there. And it was so muddy from all the rain, etc., that the bombs and the artillery shells would just sink in the mud and they wouldn't even explode. Or they would explode at a later date when some people were nearby. And so one of the things he said, one of the things we have to do is to change the fuse on the shell. Something, I'm always amazed that somebody didn't think of it before. They just shortened the fuse. They had a special fuse that they had made for when we started our attack, so that the artillery would blow up as soon as it touched the barbed wire. And we were able to take out over 80% of the barbed wire for the attack, so they could go straight forward. The other thing he was really, really good at was the getting after it, because we're at the bottom of the hill. Think of the old game which became popular at this time throughout Canada and the world, King of the Hill. They were best guess. They'd see, trying to figure out where the German artillery was, and they would just lob bombs over thinking they're hitting. But he scientifically figured out how to pinpoint the positions. And it started by saying, okay, first thing we have to do is spread our men out across our part of the front, so they're 10 feet apart. We want men with binoculars. and so that and a man with a stopwatch, and we need a man with with a with a with a pail of water and a wire and a nail wound up in the wire so that it would just barely touch the wire. And so each man, what they had to do across our section of the front was, when the man with the telescope or the field glasses saw a flash of light from the German artillery, he'd say, now. The man with the stopwatch would press it. Now, because we know sound travels, and it will travel through the ground, the vibrations from the gunfire would cause the needle in the water to make a ripple. When the man with the pail in the water saw that, he would say, stop. We now knew the time from the flash of light and from the sound traveled through the ground, what the distance was. And for those who are much more smarter than I in understanding speed of light and speed of sound and the timing and everything, they now would have an exact time from here to here. And if they have it triangulated, they can mathematically figure out where the guns were. And by using this method, they took out over 80% of the enemy artillery by the time of the day of attack on April 9th. We also bombed the heck of it. We started bombing March 20th. And then it increased, of course, on April 2nd for the week of hell as the Germans crossed. So he was, once again, the most talented and capable artilleryman in the entire Allied forces, and other people soon, as we started using microphones to pick up the sound so we could, on the ground, so that we became a better system instead of having the pail in the water. Next slide, Steph. Now we're going to take a look at some of the heroes. As you know, the Victoria Cross winners, the Victoria Cross medal is until recently, and during this time of our history, the Victoria Cross was named after Queen Victoria. It was the most the highest level of bravery that could be done. And Steph, you can just space this out. These are some of each of the four men who won a Victoria Cross at Vimy Ridge. Read their stories. I'm sure you've all known them. You can find it, but just please know that to give you an idea how difficult it was to win, that only 4 were won during the Boer War in the entire British Dominion. There were 628 Victoria Crosses handed out in World War I to all the British colonies. Canada won 64 of them, so over 10% of them went to Canadians. And a very valid argument can be made if you do some stories and some different medals. That some of I know there's a young man from Port Perry that he was recommended a Victoria Cross, but his name was scratched out and put for a lesser medal because they just thought Canada was getting too many. So we had 64 from the First World War just for Canada alone. We only won 13 during World War II. 4 Canadians, as I mentioned, won the Victoria Cross. That can do the next one. Next, so this is Private Milne, Sergeant Ellis. They all did remarkable things. Sergeant York, the United States, has nothing on these men whatsoever. What they did was tremendous. So 4 Canadians. Next one, please, Steph. John Patterson. The 4 Canadians at Vimy Ridge. They were the only ones. There were 2 Brits that also won in the Battle of Arras, who won the cross. So there's 6 medals in the entire front of the 6 Victoria Cross won of that war. Only 4 of them were won by Canadians and 2 by all the other countries that were there. So there's some remarkable stories that you can look into, or you can have your students expand into it. Some great. So all these soldiers have some tremendous backstories. Next one, please, Steph. And maybe one of the most famous is Thane McDowell. Just an incredible. He's the only one who survived. He's from Brockville. he captured single-handedly 75 German soldiers by bluffing, basically. Next one, please. Next thing I want to talk about is our First Nations. There's one that's Henry Norwest. His nickname was Ducky. Our First Nations played a remarkable role in at Vimy. Just absolutely remarkable. We wouldn't have been successful not only at Vimy, but also in the follow battles during the 100 days because of their skills. At Vimy, they led our sniper corps, of course, but they also led our trench raids. And it was the trench raids that allowed us to know where exactly every German group was, how many they were, how were they armed, etc. They were brought back prisoners. We probably knew more about the German army, definitely more than they knew about us, and probably more than most Germans that were fighting on the other side. And this all had to do with the contributions of our First Nations. And something to think about is what they went through. Is that across Canada, the men who went to war, a lot of them were very naive. Some of them were boy soldiers when they joined. They really knew nothing about the ways of war, the ways of men, how to live with other men, to be in Europe, to deal with all the different pressures. Now add on to that, it's complicated by now adding on to it. Now you have some of our First Nations living amongst white soldiers for the first time in their life. So it was a very difficult for them, and a lot of them came back with post-traumatic stress in their own communities. There's some wonderful stories out there. They also had there was two main signing areas that they went down near down by Stratford on the Lake, Niagara, or they also perhaps went to Northern Ontario. There were two regiments where they joined. Then as all many joined the war, then they were split up to form battalions, and that was done. So they were split up. But some remarkable stories, and one of the famous ones is Henry Norwest. Just a remarkable job that they did, and when they came back, they were largely unrecognized for the longest time, and it's time that they get the recognition they should. Next slide, please. Another one is George McLean from BC, and he joined twice, and he joined World War One at the age of 41 and fought at Vimy. He should have won a Victoria Cross, absolutely should have won, and single-handedly captured 19 prisoners. Just absolutely remarkable what this man did. Next slide, please. We should also talk about Black Canadians. Like many others, they were caught up in the excitement of the war, the patriotism, and they wanted to serve their king and country. They also wanted a steady paycheck. However, sadly, because of the prejudice at the time, they weren't really allowed to join the regular corps. They formed a Black battalion. Largely, there's about 600 of them that came from Nova Scotia, and they didn't want them fighting necessarily along the white soldiers, so they put the Black corps from Nova Scotia became a construction crew. They were pivotal in forming the trenches and the mining areas and everything down below, tramways, etc. They were incredible in that. But as the war went on, they did start allowing Black soldiers to become part of that battalion. About 600 of them, and altogether worked out to about 2,000 Black soldiers in World War One. So they played an important role way before this happened anywhere else, like the United States or Britain. Next slide, please. So this is Jeremiah Jones' story. The next person I want to mention is Mitsui from BC. The Japanese Canadians basically from the British Columbia area, some from elsewhere, but the majority from elsewhere. This is his story. He was a remarkable man. A lot of the Japanese Canadians, because they were not allowed to their rights in British Columbia specifically, but they wanted to join the war, and so they petitioned for the longest time to be able to get into it. And they were finally given a path to citizenship if they fought in the war. So a lot of them then when they tried to enlist in BC, they were still stopped. So a lot of them, they found out that in Alberta, they were accepting men of Japanese heritage to join the regiments there. So a lot of them made their way to Alberta to register. And next he found himself in France. Our leaders are a bit concerned about, because so many of them didn't enlist, that they made Matsui put a battalion of all Japanese, the 10th Battalion, under his command. He fought at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, he fought at Hill 70, he fought at all the major battles all through the war. He was along the way. Following Hill 70, he was going to sergeant. He was awarded the military medal for leadership bravery. Probably should have been a higher medal, but once again, because of his heritage, he was denied. When he returned after the war, the Japanese men in British Columbia were denied the right to vote. He was turned down, and he spent the rest of his life fighting for it. And then, of course, he had his own business, taken away from him during World War II as part of the Japanese internment camps. And eventually, I believe it was 1978, I think, he was finally brought back. After World War, because of the prejudice and everything he lost, and after World War II, he moved to Hamilton. He was there for around 1978. I could be wrong on that. He was then brought back to BC, and there's a monument there, and he received the accolades that he should deserve. Next slide, please. Women in Vimy. Obviously, at that time, women were not allowed to fight in the war. We had several women volunteer to go to the war as nurses. As you can see by the costumes, not costumes, the uniforms they were wearing. They're blue, so they were known as the Bluebirds. If you've seen the Canadian movie, the Passchendaele, you'll recognize the importance of that. There was over 3,000 of them that provided these medical services overseas, and about 50 of them were killed due to disease and attacks on the hospital camps, and or some who were on the hospital ship, the Andover Castle. In Ottawa, we're going to go to Parliament in the center block. We'll see an actual memorial, which is dedicated to them. If you look at the next slide, there's an interesting picture. The next slide is the first time the women got to vote, and here they were I'm leaning forward now to talk louder. I can see that I've been told to speak louder. This is when women were voting for the first time. It's a colorized picture, but here in France, they're voting for the very first time. I thought it was a nice picture because the women's war effort there as well at home, and women were allowed the right to vote. And of course, it was a political reason. They wanted women to vote to replace the men that might not be able to vote, so that the government could be reelected. Next picture, please. Now let's talk about the plan. Probably one of the good innovative things. Curry's plan, and under his guidance, it was all about preparation and practice and rehearsal. And here's what basically made the difference why we were successful at Vimy Ridge and Britain and France were not. One was everything that we did in no particular order. One was our soldier training. Our soldiers were trained in such a way that they knew everything. They didn't believe in that in the British system where only the officers led. But under the old system, what would happen if you were the enemy, and we did it too, our side did it, is you picked the men with the biggest hats and you shot them. Because they're the only ones that knew the tracks, the other soldiers didn't know what they had to do next. Our soldiers were trained in such a detailed way that they knew every step of the plan. They all carried maps of where they had to be. They practiced, they rehearsed. Because of the incredible knowledge we had from our trench raids, from our First Nations, but also from our aerial surveillance, which I'll talk about in a moment, we knew everything was. We not only knew everything we did, we built a life-size, basically a repeat of it, but on flat land down below, where they couldn't see us practicing. And we mapped it out. And our men practiced the artillery barrage in such a way. Our men knew that they knew where they had to be every 10 minutes. They had to cover 100 yards for the next line along the artillery barrage as it moved up. They know where they had to go. So their major officer was gone. They knew what they had to do. Every soldier knew how to fire every weapon that was in their battalion or that was going up the hill. Not only their own weapons, but every weapon in their own battalion, but also German weapons that they had to pick up something. And they practiced it on the mock field. They lined up horses across the way with white flags so that if they would move that back every 10 minutes and you had to get there. If you got there too soon, you'd be killed. And they would tell you, they were practicing more models that used later on, is they would say, you're a victim of friendly fire, stay there. And all they gave out 40,000 maps to the soldiers. Everybody wore the same uniform. There was nothing that, there was absolutely nothing that could distinguish an officer from a soldier. They all looked the same. Aerial surveillance. There was no official Canadian Air Force. There was an air grouping that we had. We were probably one of the first countries in the world to actually integrate our planes that we had at Vimy as part of the overall attack and strategy. Not only were they there for surveillance to protect our balloons that we had on, but they were also there to shoot down the enemy so they couldn't attack our balloons. So they had three jobs: shoot down the enemy balloons which were trying to spy on us, and we had 100% success. Two, protect our balloons from being attacked, and we did. None of our balloons were shot down. Billy Bishop won his first medal at Vimy Ridge. And it was Vimy Ridge during the attack said, it looks like Canada is walking up the hill. And the way they're moving, it looks like they're strolling through the park. We were largely using carrier pigeons, carrying messages down to our intelligence gatherers about what they saw in the area of surveillance. We were the first country in the world to use Morse code to come down so that you communicated so the wires couldn't be cut accidentally or on purpose. The 106Qs means that I already talked about that, how we took it out. We were also the first group to make sure, but not made sure that we religiously cleansed our artillery so they wouldn't break down. So we had the incredible equipment maintenance, and of course the triangulation. So we took out the barbed wire. We took out all the artillery, 80% of it, so that the day of the attack, our men could move up the hill. The creeping barrage, as I mentioned already, we rehearsed it. They have the step. The men, they refer to it as the Vimy glide, a pace that they would walk as they were going up the hill, so they could keep continuing, so they wouldn't walk too fast and get there too soon. The whole point of the creeping barrage is that prior to the creeping barrage is if a person and all other attacks which were going on that day on either side of us, they were using the old message of artillery. If you're on the other side and you got attacked, you just went underground until the attack was over. And when the attack stopped, you knew when the artillery attack stopped, you knew the other side was coming. You went up and you waited, and you popped up aground, and when the whistle heard, there you were, and you could shoot them down. For the creeping barrage, the whole point was their soldiers are going to go underground the entire time when the bombing was taking place, trying to save themselves from being killed by the artillery was landing. And by the time our men arrived at the gates of at their trenches, and the bombing stopped, when they came up, our men were waiting for them. So it was this preparation and endless rehearsal and preparations that we had to do. The tramways we had to go to get. We needed 40,000 gallons of water a day for our men. There were 600,000 gallons of water a day. There were 100,000 Canadians there at the time. 50,000 animals for the horses to carry the food endlessly back and forth. The artillery began on March 20th, and then it increased on April 6th. On April 2nd, it increased to 40,000 rounds a day. They often say that you could hear the bombing taking place back in England. Brigadier General Ross had said this is when he saw that when our men went out and they came in front of exploded the underground tunnels so they could come up in the middle of no man's land. So they would, he said it's just like watching Canada, the birth of the nation. The attack started on April 9th. We were the only country in the Allies that day to accomplish all their goals. Not only did we accomplish all our goals, we had to finish what Britain was supposed to capture, and that was the highest point, which is the temple. So it took us 3 days to capture that. The battalions was actually supposed to be held in reserve from Nova Scotia, came in and captured that, and it was Brigadier General Hilliam of the 85th Battalion of Nova Scotia that said, and I'm hoping you're going to laugh at this because he actually said it. He sent down a message by a runner to the command that I am the king of the pimple. Now it has a double meaning if you think you don't want to be a king of the pimple, but when I think of the movie Titanic, maybe the Canadian director, maybe he took a bit of license on his history. I don't know how much he knew. Next slide, please. Yeah. Vimy Memorial. I'm going to have to go through this quickly because we only have a bit of time. Next slide. The Vimy Memorial. When Canada decided to, when all the Allies were told that they could build a memorial, Canada decided they'd have one, and they had to decide where they have it, and they wanted to where to put it. It was Walter Allward who decided that he was one of the 160 people that did it. In 1922, Canada gave the rights to. Is there a right to? When you go to Vimy Ridge, you're actually in Canada. France gave that land to Canada. They brought over Canadian trees so the boys could be buried at home. Do the preparations, as you can see, the incredible preparations. Where the marble that they use is from elsewhere. It's from I'm trying to think, Croatia, and they're very, very. They actually, when we did it for the 90th celebration, they went back to the same mines to get that land. But it was a remarkable contest that they had, the limestone from Croatia, and it's a good book to read about it. Of course, there's always faction into it. Is to read the book. This I want to say the stone. Next slide. We'll talk about it. I talk about that in the next slide. Next slide, Steph, please. Okay, so here's about the monument that it's built. The stone carvers, that's it. Sorry, I get it. The battalion, if you look at the back of your $20 bill, if you have it, the two pillars represent England, Canada and France, and then they have all these symbols. If you ever have a chance, or if you've already been there, you go to the Ottawa War Museum, if you look inside of the actual statue, Allward designed these statues, these 20 allegorical figures to represent faith, honor, truth, etc. He drew them just slightly larger than life, and using the same method that Michelangelo did in the Sistine Chapel. He drew it out on. He then mapped it out with a series. You know how you map it out geometrically with the X's on different spots. That way, the carvers could do like 4 inches at a time, so they get the actual carvings that he wanted. Just a remarkable job. You have a chance to go to Ottawa to see it. Then, of course, there's the famous, my favorite part of it is Mother Canada, or Canada Bird Act, Morning of a Country. If you have a chance, and I encourage you, if you haven't been there, to visit battlefields in Europe, go to some of all of the different battlefields, and the Vimy Ridge Memorial truly takes your breath away. When people say, why do you do what you do? One of the reasons why I do it is that when I see somebody, a friend, or no matter what their age, I see somebody see the Vimy Memorial for the first time, it takes their breath away. It reminds me of what I felt when I first saw it. Next slide, please. Here's Walter Allred, bit of a dapper. Something I was not talking about. When Walter Allred was so worried that Germany in World War II was going to destroy his memorial, that when the war was over, he personally paid out of his own money to fly to England and then rent an airplane. And he flew over the Vimy Memorial 4 times to make sure. Because throughout World War II, he had nightmares thinking the Vimy Memorial was going to be destroyed by the Germans. What he didn't know was Hitler visited. And Hitler, as you know, fought in World War One. He thought that it was holy ground for the Germans as well. The Germans didn't see Vimy Ridge as a defeat. To them, it was just a minor reversal. Some of them also thought it was a victory because we had 10,000 casualties, which 3,600 men had killed. It wasn't, if you're talking about the legend and the myth, the outcome of Vimy Ridge did not change the outcome of World War II whatsoever. It changed how we fought it. Now we're recognized in our place at the peace talks and everything else. That historically, militarily, Hill 70 was a bigger victory. But Walter Allred, Hitler had his top-notch #1 crew defend the memorial, and he actually ordered no bombers, no artillery fire, anti-aircraft fire over the Vimy Ridge area. So for many soldiers coming back from a bomber raids later in World War II, they tried to fly towards Vimy for 2 reasons. In the night with the full moon, it kind of goes dark. They knew the closer they got to Vimy, that that's an area they would not be attacked on. So there's a little bit of a history how it ties into World War II. Next slide, please. And there we go. If you want, we can send you this slideshow so you can catch up and read some more later. It was 1936 is when it was unveiled by King Edward VIII, and that was the first pilgrimage, 1936 pilgrimage. Oddly enough, the cost for the Canadian government to send any veteran who wanted to go in today's dollars was $4,000. So it's about the same to go now on a trip as it was in 1936, which is rather a bit irony in it. Next slide, please. Okay, and the next slide. So 1936 is a dedication. It was the big celebration in 90th anniversary. And then in 2012, it was the 95th. And then it was the Saturday I referred to 2017 as a disaster of 100th anniversary. It departed from normal. And that will never ever occur again for a number of reasons. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. Is I'm afraid. I'm actually afraid of what might happen. I don't want to see a reversal prior to when we started this back, and before the 9th anniversary, nobody's going to visit because of the current travel conditions in Europe, and everybody's being concerned about obviously COVID. That it's going to be a while before people go back. And as you saw in the virtual Remembrance Day ceremony this year, when COVID is finally over, there's going to be terrible, terrible national debts to pay. And I'm afraid of cutbacks are going to happen to remembrance and ceremonies are taking place all across Canada, locally, nationally, and internationally. And we might not ever recover the passion of people now. And part of it, what's going on, being up to the 100th anniversary, I think is because of the passion about the kids. The kids, because of the internet, because oddly enough, even computer games, know more about the war than we ever did in the war. And they want to know what their parents did, what their grandparents did. As some families want holes pitched in. To show you how things come around at the end of the war, COVID, the new pandemic, 1918, took place. And back then, anywhere between 20 and 100 million, depending who you read, to died of the pandemic in 1918. We lost about 50,000 Canadians it was called the Spanish flu. It wasn't the Spanish flu. The only reason it's called the Spanish flu was because of fake media. Both sides of the war wouldn't report of the losses of the flu that was taking place, the H1N1 virus that was taking place. The only country that was reporting it was Spain because they were neutral. So everyone said, oh, they have a virus. It's coming here. We'll call it the Spanish flu. About 776 soldiers died of it. Next slide. There's a question that I'm to ask. Is there any movies I would recommend? I would actually recommend that you watch some really great documentaries. The movie, I mean, Passchendaele has some great parts to it, but they get into things to make it commercial that just didn't need to be there. But there's some nothing really great. Oh, if you speak French, there's a wonderful movie about the French War, about France in the war. It covers the famous Christmas on the front. It's beautifully well done. So if you're in a French school, it hasn't been translated. There's supposed to be a new one coming out, and they're probably waiting for. Yes, what is rather good movie though, if you're looking for Dunkirk, even though everything is. I like going to the great movies of my youth growing up were all made to justify Vietnam and show how well the Americans done. But it's rather interesting to it. So I need to wrap up in a few minutes. Sorry, I've gone awfully fast, but there's so much to cover. I could spend an hour or more on each individual topic, and I tried tonight was to provide a bunch of low information, even an oversight. There are so many great books out there. Please help support Canadian authors and buy their books. They're fascinating. I wish I had them when I was a kid, and I'm sure our history teachers from my youth wish we had them as well. Please consider at some point in the future, either you, your family, your school, you must go to Vimy. If somebody was to die and somehow I was made the king of Canada for one day, I would say to be a Canadian citizen or to vote, you have to visit the Canadian battlefield sometime in your life. It is truly a life-changing event, no matter what age you are. So please go sometime in the future. Take a group of friends, organize a community group, go. I think I'm always amazed at the number of people who want to visit the battlefield but just don't think they can go. It's truly amazing. You can always do your side trips to Paris or London, or if you're going to go to Italy, you can do that. They're all very much an emotional, and you'll never be as proud to be Canadian as you are when you visit one of these sites. And so the final answer is, was it the birth of the nation? Is what's real in Canada, the Vimy Ridge, the myth or the legend? I'll leave that for you to decide. I think there are arguments for both, depending on whether you want to look at it militarily, politically, socially. But it's definitely a message. If it gets more thinking about the contributions of our men in the front, then I think it's definitely the legend. So thank you very much for attending. Are there any other questions that you would like? Next slide, Steph. Well, we want our next webinar, which we're thinking of doing in late January or February, please have comments, would be in the Italian campaign. Now World War II, and there's some more tremendous stories, Canadians leading the way. Hitler having learned his lesson in World War I, what the Canadians did, wherever Canadians were sent, he always made sure he sent his best soldier, because he knew that. When people say, "What was, Dave? What do you think was the overall success of Vimy due to?" I always refer to that intangible thing, and I call it Canada's hockey personality. Just like we won many an international hockey tournament, our men would go into the corners and fight for the puck. We'd go in and win. We would fight. We wouldn't give up. And that's been our story in everything we do. And that legend even continues when in Afghanistan, when our soldiers, when we captured when the United States caught some of the enemy in Afghanistan, they interviewed them, and they asked them, Americans want to know how did you fear us? And they said, no, we only fear the Canadians. And the legend of the Canadian Army goes on. Thank you very much for attending. As my clock says, we've run out of time. Steph, did you have anything you wanted to say to wrap it up?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone as well for attending. And thank you so much, Dave, for educating us a little bit more about Ridge tonight.
Great. Now I know that I think by later in the week, in the next couple of days, this will be, you'll be able to go on the Explorer website and you'll be able to get a taping of this if you want to review it. If you contact Explorer, they'll give you my email if you want some written background materials on some of these things. I've got lots that I can share. Thank you very much, and I would love to come see you sometime when we open up. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Dave, and we hope everyone can join us at the next webinar.